Janet turns up then. Okay.
So welcome back, everyone, to week 6 now. Wow, it's just gone really quick, hasn't it? It's just flying by. Hope you're all doing okay. So big welcome to Tony this morning, who's going to join us to do the safeguarding session. And just to remind you all that the session will be recorded. I think some of you may have heard that Dawn said earlier that it will be used for the other volunteers training and the trustees training as well this session. And I just want to say, because we're doing safeguarding today, if there's any triggers for any of you, then just take time out. You can leave the Zoom and rejoin using the same link, or turn your cameras off if you prefer, and for a few minutes, and you can rejoin us if you like. Just look after yourselves, basically. We're going to do things a bit differently today. So if Tony's with us, we're going to do the homework and things like that at the end of the session. So, okay, over to Tony.
Okay, thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. I'll just briefly introduce myself. I may well have seen some of you. I can remember faces, but what I can't do is sort of place where I've seen the face. So I've recognised some of the faces. So I've either seen you on the training that I delivered, or probably just over a year ago to Home-Start Kennet, or maybe you attended some training that I used to sort of deliver when I was with the local Safeguarding Children Board. So, but my memory doesn't go that far back. But anyway. So welcome to the training today. So my background is that before I became a trainer, I was a police officer in Wiltshire, and I was one of the first officers to be joint trained alongside social workers in the early 1990s to investigate child abuse and neglect. But the last 5.5 years of my career with Wiltshire Police before I retired, I was a detective sergeant and I managed the child abuse investigation team at Salisbury. And for those who don't know what those teams of officers do, they're small teams of officers. There's usually only about 5 in each team, headed up by a sergeant, detective sergeant. And we work with other agencies to investigate primarily intrafamilial child abuse, so anything which happens within the family home. But that role kind of expanded because we were finding that the children were sort of facing risks from outside of the family home, such as by being groomed via the internet, or maybe being groomed and exploited into gangs and things like that. So we had to kind of change our roles sort of slightly to be a bit more flexible rather than just intrafamilial stuff. So I then retired from there, and I went to work for Wiltshire Local Safeguarding Children Board. And basically, if you don't know what that is, it's just a partnership of all the agencies that work with children and families throughout Wiltshire. And that the job of the board is to oversee each other, really, and to make sure that they perform all their safeguarding duties effectively. That's all they do. But it's a great big sort of group of people. So and my job there was to design and deliver the multi-agency child protection training program. But then I retired from there. You can see a theme of retirement parties coming on here, can't you? Obviously like tea and cake. And then I retired, and then I got some invitation to do some training on a private basis. So then I thought, why didn't I do it officially? So I set up my own training business. So I'm not very good at retiring. Other things I do as well, I'm chair of the Children and Families Voluntary Sector Forum. That's a mouthful, isn't it? I guess some of you are probably aware of the forum, but we got 76 members, and they range from big organisations like Barnardo's and Wiltshire Wildlife Trust, all the way down to one-person organisations that try to assist people, children and young families across the whole of Wiltshire, delivering a whole range of services which aren't delivered by children's social care. So it's like a non-statutory early help process. So I'm the chair of that. I also volunteer for the Catholic Church. Now, I should make it clear that I'm not a Catholic and I don't go to church, so apologies to anyone who's sort of got a faith. But I'm part of the National Catholic Safeguarding Commission, and I work with the Survivors Advisory Panel. And our job is to work with the Catholic Church to try to advise them on how to respond better to either recent concerns or allegations of abuse, or non-recent concerns or allegations as well. So, and for those of you sort of been keeping an eye on the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse, you'll know that organisations, and they're not the only ones by any means, haven't been doing particularly well with that regard over the last sort of 50 years or so. So it's about improvement, really, to try to sort of persuade them to move forward and deal with those concerns, and also prevention as well. That prevention's a big part that we hope to play in that. So that's what I do. But today I'm with you and I'm delivering the training. So I guess can I just, I know who Dawn and Tang are, but can we just sort of summarize that you're all volunteers then, are you? Or every single one of you? Okay, lots of, okay, and how are you finding it? How are you finding it in your role? Are you enjoying it? Is that a strange thing to say? Are you enjoying that job?
We're just being trained at the moment, so no real experience.
Okay, well, apart from you, but you say that, but of course, life experience is a massive part of safeguarding children. You know, yes, people can be trained to do it, but your life experience and sort of gut instincts and common sense and things like that, they can really help in the role that you're about to undertake. So, you know, don't underestimate yourselves. You know, you're going to play a really important role. So this is how the training works. So we'll be using a PowerPoint presentation. And so I'll be kind of hopping in and out the screen to do that. And I'll try to make it as interactive as possible. But we'll do that by using breakout rooms, which I guess you're accustomed to now, to try to make it a little bit more interactive. And then when you come out of the breakout rooms, we'll have a feedback and discussion. Because I think that I'm one of those trainers that believe in like an informal style. And I think there's an awful lot of value to be gained from discussion. Okay, then we can show lots of slides and video clips, but there's still no substitute really for discussion, because I think that's what brings out all the learning points. So at least I think that's my belief anyway with training, not just showing people loads of slides and video clips. I don't think that's the way forward. But we have to present it in some form, so I guess that we're going to use PowerPoint today. Okay, so I'm going to go into the screen and I'm basically going to sort of go through some information slides at the start, going to introduce what we're going to cover today and the working agreement, and in that includes like a welfare check as well. So are we all ready to start the slideshow then? I'm just going to have to close up. Our house faces due south, and it's not long before the sun comes around, and I'll be blinded. I have to put my sunglasses on. That'd look a bit odd, wouldn't it? We can see the screen. So apologies for the last minute adjustment. The sun's just come out. Seems criminal, doesn't it, blocking the sun out after a long winter, but that's better. I can see you now. Okay, so I'm going to go into the PowerPoint. Okay, with me, sometimes you get a little bit of a lag in when waiting for it to load up, just like now. Okay. So I'm going to check that you can see it. It's taking a bit of time to load up. You should be able to see loads of individual slides that you can't probably read.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's go into the proper version. Okay, so welcome to the training, and it is safeguarding training for Home-Start Kennet volunteers. So what we're going to look at is I guess why you need training, or why training might be beneficial, because there's lots of guidance around about people who work or volunteer with children and young people, and some of it is statutory guidance, which obviously comes from legislation from the government. And the background to why we've got legislation and guidance is because that in the past, when we didn't have guidance, safeguarding children didn't work very well, because people didn't understand that they had a statutory responsibility, if they're working with children and young people, to try to do their best to help keep them safe. So there's lots of guidance, and I guess that Tang and other people probably refer to it. So the main guidance which is around at the moment is something called Working Together to Safeguard Children 2018. And if you don't have to go very far into this document, because it talks about what people's responsibilities are if you work with children and young people. And you can see on the slide, it includes loads of people, all the way through from police, early years professionals, but really importantly, it covers voluntary and community workers as well. And you can see that actually social workers are right at the end, aren't they? But everyone has got a responsibility to keep them safe. And I guess the reason they're right at the end there is, in reality, most of the safeguarding work, believe it or not, is actually done by people who aren't social workers. It's mostly all the people in that list up there. That's who do most of the work. Social workers only become involved when children have got really sort of high-end needs, or maybe they're at risk of something which we call significant harm. So most of the work is done by people like you and people who work in schools and other places. So is somebody going to let Janet in? Have you done that, Dawn?
Already done.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think the really important thing to bear in mind as well is that it is a multi-agency responsibility, because as you can see there from working together, it's impossible for one single professional or one organisation to have a full picture of children's needs and circumstances. And if we are to keep children safe in the right way, and that's usually done by providing help, everyone who works for them has got a role to play in identifying concerns. And then if something is wrong, or maybe the child's needs aren't being met, it's really important to share that information, to talk to somebody else so that action can be taken. And your role, I guess the role that you play, you are the eyes and ears for children. You are those people who are going to come across children and families in sometimes difficult situations. And it's your responsibility to try to help them. And if you've got concerns, is to talk to somebody and share information to make sure that some sort of action is taken to either make sure that child's needs are met or to make sure that they're safe. So that's where your responsibility comes from. So, sorry, I got a bit trigger happy there. Click too far. Let's go back. Okay, so what are we going to look at today? We're going to, good job I haven't got a gun, isn't it, really? You see when they never let me on firearms, I'd have ended up probably shooting myself. So what are we going to look at today? We're going to look at one of the things which is cropped up. So that a lot of the training, I've tried to make it relevant to your role today and deal with current issues that affect children and young people. One of the biggest things, which has come from anecdotal information and also research, is that because of COVID-19, lots of people are really struggling with their mental health, children and adults alike. So what we're going to do is try to explore what the impact of poor mental health might be on parenting capacity. What effect might it have, and what role can you play in helping parents who are going through this kind of process at the moment because of COVID-19. And also to recognise that we live in a very different world at the moment, and there are significant challenges of working with families under the current COVID-19 restrictions. So I know that we're all optimistic because we've got the vaccine and everything like that, so things will start to get back to normal. But I think we need to work, we'll be working with the impact of COVID-19 for quite a long time. And we need to understand the restrictions, and we need to understand how perhaps we might be able to sort of change our ways of working to overcome some of those challenges. One of the ways that we can keep children safe is twofold really, is to understand the children and families that you're working with, but also to try to understand the current context of abuse and neglect. So what does that mean? That means, so what are the challenges that children and family are facing at the moment? And what are the risks, either the current risk or emerging risks that children and young people are starting to face in the current context, okay? And also what we're going to look at particularly, one of the things which has been highlighted, particularly since the COVID restrictions have come into place, and sometimes people think they're linked to poor mental health. They think they're also linked to other issues as well. But certainly what Wiltshire Police are finding, and also Children's Social Care, is that the number of reports around domestic abuse have increased, and that's throughout the whole of Wiltshire. And there are safeguarding risks which are associated with children who are experiencing domestic abuse. So we'll be looking at those throughout the course of the next 2 hours as well. Okay, so this is a working agreement. Now, some trainers use the terminology ground rules, and I think that immediately sounds like there's some sort of restriction. Is it me that's a bit trigger happy with that, or my mouse? Timekeeping on the course today is going to be really quite tight. We've only got 2 hours. And as I said, I'll try to get you involved in lots of discussion. So with Zoom particularly, it's really easy to accidentally talk over somebody. So we need to sort of take care, and in those activities and discussions, make sure that we don't overtalk people. Please make sure that mobile phones and devices are turned off so that they don't distract us all. And please feel free to contribute to the training. Okay, there's loads of research around to say that in this type of training, if people share professional, and I stress professional experiences, okay, it can help us all learn. Okay, and also please try to avoid the use of jargon. I suppose being new to the role, you're probably not that embedded in jargon and technical language at the moment, but I think you soon will be as you progress in your role. So please try to avoid the use of jargon in a moment. And actually, we're going to do an activity in a moment around jargon. Acknowledge diversity. What does that mean? Well, we're all different for all sorts of reasons, so just please acknowledge that. We need to think about confidentiality, because if you are going to use professional, again I stress professional experiences to help us all learn, please recognise that what you're going to be talking about is sensitive, confidential information. So please anonymise the people that you're talking about. And if anyone is accidentally identified, then please, what we have to do is make sure that what we talk about within training stays within training. Tang mentioned the content, and I think it's worth mentioning again that this is a child protection and safeguarding course. Now, it won't be a horror show, let me assure you of that, and we won't be showing horrible photographs of injuries and things like that, because I don't think they're very productive at all. In fact, I think they're counterproductive. So we'll try and make it as less sort of impactful as we can. However, if anyone is affected, as Tang said, please just take time out, and you'll know if you're going to be affected. So please just turn your camera off, turn the sound off, take time out, and come back in when you're ready. And if anyone is affected, then I'll sort of hang around at the end for a little bit to see if I can help anyone. Zoom platform, please use the raise hand button if you want to speak, and mute your microphone unless you're speaking, because that sometimes if we don't do that, it can sound like we're in a rock concert with all the sort of that you get. And please keep your camera on unless we suddenly get broadband issues where sometimes the quality can go, so we might ask people to turn the cameras off to improve the broadband width. Okay, now I mentioned jargon, so what I'd like you to do now is I just need to make sure, have you all got a copy of the PowerPoint, either a paper copy or whether you've got it on the screen, because we can do that jargon busting activity.
No, they weren't sent a copy, Tony.
Okay.
Okay.
I haven't got the PowerPoint, Tony. But if you put me in one group, Tony, I have it, so I can read out and we can do it that way.
Okay, so I was thinking, because we can be flexible about the way we do. We don't have to put people into breakout rooms. We can do this activity as a big shout out, as we call it, rather than put people into breakout rooms. But what I will do, so I'll put the slide up on the screen, and I'll give you like a chance as individuals to write down what you think the answers are. Because I think if I just tell you the answers, you go, oh yeah, that's great. But I think if you actually have to think about them and write them down, you're probably more likely to understand and remember them. So if I go back into the screen and I'll put the slides up. So all you have to do, this is a jargon buster. So all you have to do, and you will come across, as you progress in your role as a volunteer, you will come across terminology and acronyms and things like that and jargon. And if you don't understand what the jargon means, you can be sort of disadvantaged, because I'll explain it at the end. This is a bit more than a jargon buster activity. There's a bit more to it than just understanding what this terminology means, okay? So I'll go back onto the screen, start sharing it, and then I'll leave the slide up there. You can kind of write them down, put your answers in, and then we'll all feed back as a big group. Is that okay? Let's do that with them. Hopefully it will go back to the same slide. Okay, is it good? Yeah, it's gone back to the same slide. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's speaking the same language. Okay, so I'll leave that slide up there. So all you have to do is, on a piece of paper, try to interpret and write down what you think this abbreviation and jargon means. So I'll leave that up there for 2 or 3 minutes, and then I'll go to the next slide. I'll have to be careful because my version has got the answers on, so I'll have to make sure that you don't see them. Otherwise, that would be a bit silly, wouldn't it? So I'll leave that out there for a couple of moments. And you can feel free to shout out and chat to each other if you like while you're doing this, as long as you don't sort of talk over each other. Can get a bit chaotic, but hey ho. So feel free to say, what do you think that means? Or actually somebody might already know the answer and you can help each other out.
I'm struggling. I think we've talked about MASH before, haven't we?
Yeah.
That a multi-agency safeguarding hub?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
is that what it is?
Pretty good.
Yeah, that's a good start.
I
Mm,
know
I
the,
think that's the only one I know.
the EHCP is Education and Healthcare Plan.
Oh,
Yeah,
And
yeah, I reckon that's that. That was the one I knew.
sorry, and the LAC, I think, is
Yeah.
looked after children.
Yes,
Yeah.
obviously you're on a roll this.
Okay, good.
Then I'm struggling after that. Oh, Children in Need, CIN.
Oh, yeah.
Strat looks like a word, not an acronym, so it might be
Ah.
strategy.
A strategy
I think
or
that's
something.
Yeah.
An S47 investigation, isn't that something to do with the when it goes sort of above and others have to become involved? It's part of the act.
Yeah. Is it part of the
Yeah.
Children's Act or something?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Where
I'm
it's more
sure it
serious
is.
than the local, oh, I don't know, something like that.
I think that's when, isn't that when the police get involved? Anyway, it's a higher level of review.
Investigation, isn't it? And it's to do.
Yeah.
It's under the act.
Ooh, what was ICPC? Can't be International Children's. No.
Dependent.
Child protection, something to do with child protection conference?
Yeah.
Mission or something?
Initial child protection conference.
But
What
what's
is it?
Initial child protection.
Oh, initial. Okay, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I
The
don't-
only one I recognised was MESH.
Mm.
I don't recognise that. What is that?
Multi-agency safeguarding hub.
Right.
What's
Okay.
DOF? We've got
You-
DOF.
Department
You're
of.
You're doing really well, folks. Shall I reveal the answers?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and I guess they're sort of kind of useful. One, because you will come across it, and families might say to you, like, and it's amazing how families pick up on this sort of language, and they use it, and you think, so if they say that, like, my child was subject of sin or lack, then you think, so what's that mean? Is there any significance in that? Well, I'll try to explain that. So hopefully, so CSC stands for Children's Social Care. What that means is basically social workers in Wiltshire who work primarily with children. But there's all sorts of teams. People who work in the safeguarding teams, people who work with children with disability. But that sort of generalism is children's social care. Okay, so you might come across that. And you got this one, didn't you? Education and healthcare plan. So what that is basically that we used to have years ago educational statements, didn't we? Children who were statemented, and children had healthcare plans if they had additional health needs. So what the government did, they thought, hang on, very often these things are linked. So a child's education might be affected by their health. So why don't we get health workers working together with people in schools and education, and they can work jointly on an education and healthcare plan? Brilliantly simple, isn't it? But actually, for a while, they were actually separate, which is really odd, isn't it? You think, why were they never linked? So it's about working together, really, to try to meet a child's educational and healthcare needs at the same time. STRAT, well, that stands for strategy discussion, and social workers and police are really naughty with this. They very often say, we're going to have a STRAT. Now, what that means is that if somebody thinks that a child is at risk of something which we call significant harm, that is a legal term, but that is really sort of serious harm. It's not where families need a bit of extra help. It's where a child is at risk of significant harm, where whatever is happening is going to have such a significant impact on their health and development that basically all the stuff around early help and things like that doesn't it isn't working. And it could be something like with a family who are really seriously engaged in drug dealing, substance misuse, domestic abuse, or maybe there's somebody who's in the home who's a risk to children. So it's a really high level of harm. And what it does is part of the child protection procedures that social workers and police have to follow. And it says, if you think a child is at risk of significant harm, then what you have to do is have a strategy discussion. So you call together all the different agencies. They're hosted by Children's Social Care. People like police and health go in and they have a discussion around what strategy they're going to develop. For the next one is a Section 47 investigation. So the reason it's called a Section 47 investigation is because it's under 47 of the Children Act 1989. But very often you get those naughty social workers and police officers say, we're going to have a strat and Section 47 it. And you think, what on earth are they talking about? So it's an investigation by Children's Social Care and their partners to establish if a child is at risk of significant harm. If a child is, then they have to go out and investigate with their partners to try to establish what action they need to take to keep that child safe. And it might mean, in some cases, police going off arresting people, but very, very rarely, children might be removed from the family. And it is really very rare for that to happen. So what will happen after that initial stage? Well, all those workers get back together, so they have this discussion, then they have to carry out an investigation and say, did we solve it? Did we reduce the risk? If they say, no, this is going to be a long-term risk because something like domestic abuse and substance misuse and maybe mental health as well, that's something you can't fix overnight. So what we're going to have to do next is to call an initial child protection conference where, and the parents are invited to this, really importantly, that parents are invited to a Section 47 investigation strategy discussion. That's purely for professionals, but they are invited to an initial child protection conference where all those same people that were involved in the investigation get together. It's chaired by Children's Social Care. Parents are invited, sometimes children, and they hold an initial child protection conference where everybody sits down, shares information, comes up with an assessment of what they think need to do, and they develop an initial child protection plan. So that's what they do. And hopefully that plan will reduce the risk to those children down to an acceptable level. So is everybody clear? Does that sort of help? It's all part of that process. Now, DOFA is the designated officer for allegations. And again, you'll probably come across this very rarely because within the local authority, unfortunately, when we look at how children can be harmed, sometimes they can be harmed by people who work or volunteer with them. Okay, so there's two streams within Children's Social Care, if you like. One deal with allegations or information about how a child might become at risk.
Could you shut that window for me?
And but also within the local authority, there's somebody who's called the designated officer for allegations, who deals with any allegations where they think that somebody who works or volunteers might be a risk to children and young people. Okay, they used to be called LADOs years ago. And if you go to some local authority area, which meant local authority designated officer, then they're still referred to as that within some local areas. So it's basically somebody who deals with allegations against people who work or volunteer with children. Because sadly, sometimes people can be harmed by people who work with them. Okay, so sin. I think you got that one as well, didn't you? Indeed. So if you like, when you think about levels of help and intervention, the vast majority of children are helped in Wiltshire and indeed throughout the whole of the country by people like those people on that first slide, so by like teachers, early years workers, volunteers who work with the family to provide early help. So all they're doing is coordinating what people call universal services, services which are completely free to everybody under the age of 18, like schools, early years, dentists, doctors, all those sorts of things, hospitals, they're all free. However, if a child has got sort of more complex needs, and sometimes children with disabilities fit into this criteria, where that the provision of what we call universal services isn't enough, and they might need the help of a specialist social worker and a team from the local authority, then a social worker will carry out an assessment, okay? And it might mean that that family would qualify for extra help from the local authority. So it's where you get those specialist workers involved with the family. So it's not just the other services, it's led by children's social care. Is that okay? So it's just like a higher level of help. MASH, you got that one, didn't you? Multi-agency safeguarding hub. I'm going to click too far again, but I'll leave it there. So that is basically in Wiltshire now, wherever anyone has got concerns about a child, whether it's either looking for advice around early help, or whether you think a child's at risk of significant harm, or if you think their child in need, there's only one place you go now, and there is a slide at the end to explain where that is. And it's called the Multi-Agency Safeguarding Hub. It's in County Hall. There's about 50, or it used to be, and when we work face-to-face, it's all done virtually. And there's about 50 people in there from various agencies, such as police, social care, health, housing, early years workers, education workers, child sexual exploitation workers, 50 people who are working there to jointly work together to try to keep children safe. Okay, and I think you got LAC as well, didn't you? Looked after child. So that basically, I suppose that is almost like a progression. So what I'm going to try to do is to do a bit of annotation, yeah, a bit of drawing. I must warn you that my drawing skills aren't very good. So if you imagine this process, so if we've tried early help, maybe that's not working. So you think a child is at risk of significant harm. So you have a strat or a strategy discussion. Then you have the Section 47 investigation where people go out and try to do things to help the family. That may not work. So you have the next stage is you have an initial child protection conference where people draw together on that plan to try to make sure that those risks and the help which is needed for the child is provided to try to reduce that risk down to an acceptable level. Unfortunately, sometimes that doesn't work and the risk is so great, and as I say, it's really very rare that the local authority might have to go through legal procedures to a court and apply for that child to be looked after by someone other than the parents. It could be an extended family member, or it could be that the child is taken into care and placed temporarily with a foster carer. So that's what they're called, looked after child. Okay, does that make sense, folks?
Absolutely.
Or you all got brain freeze now? Have I completely confused you?
Can I just ask, will we have these slides afterwards? Will they be sent through to us at all?
Yes, I'll send you the version with the answers on as well if you like. Yeah.
Oh yes, even better.
Yes, please.
I'll send you the version with the answers on.
Yeah, we'll forward them on to everyone later.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So, right, let's get rid of the. Sorry about my mouse skills there.
Excuse me, while we're on this,
Yeah.
when I was reading through the homework, there were a few more abbreviations which I didn't know what they stood for.
Okay. Yeah. Go for it.
One was a brag.
Oh, yes. I'll explain that a little bit later on. Brag. Yeah.
Okay, and the other one was a calf.
Oh, yes. Right. So I can explain CAF now. So hopefully what happens, so if, say if you're working with a family and, you're just sort of providing a bit of help and support. So if you think that just by Home-Start Kennet being the only organisation working with a family is going to kind of cut the mustard and is going to help the family, then that's fine. But if you're working with a family, or somebody was working with a family, it could be anyone, children's centre, could be school, early years. So if they identify issues, and for the example I can give is something where maybe a child is identified and they've got delays or issues with their speech and language, their communication, okay? So, and then if they realise as a result of that they think that communication issue is affecting their behaviour as well, because sometimes children who have difficulty communicating have difficulties with social behaviour as well. So you might need the services of somebody with with speech and language, somebody with behavioural care, and you might want to involve, if the child is of a certain age, you might want to involve the health visitor and the GP as well. So what CAF is, it's just something which is called the Common Assessment Framework. Okay, and then there should be like process at the end, and it's basically a form which all agencies use so that the families don't have to keep filling in different forms all the time. So one person is the lead professional. They sit down with the family, take an assessment of all what they think the needs, unmet needs are. They'll share that information. So if they identify that they've got speech and language issues and maybe behaviour issues as well, that person will contact speech and language. They'll contact also behaviour therapists as well, and try to coordinate those services together. And the process is called Common Assessment Framework. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does entirely.
So rather than the form, it's a process. A lot of people think it's just a form, but it's a process for providing early help to families. So the child's not at risk or anything. They're just, but they could well be. If those issues aren't nipped in the bud, then that can lead to other issues later on. Sometimes, not always, obviously.
Can I just jump in? Sorry, Tony, can I just jump in? So at Home-Start Kennet, we support families up to on a CAF level, but the FSOs will attend those meetings, and then we'll filter down to the volunteers of the outcome and the support the family need. Yeah, and just to throw a spanner in the works, they've changed it now, haven't they? They've Wiltshire Council are in the process of changing it. They're making the form a lot shorter, and it can be shared a lot electronically now. And it's called the Early Support Assessment. But nothing about the process has changed. It's still about getting permission from the family, talking to them and saying, if I contact these people and we all bring in those services together, we might better help you, or really importantly, help the child. So it's more about a process than a form, really. Does that help?
Yeah, very much so.
Wonderful.
Okay, so we'll go on to the next one. Okay, and just checking how we're doing on time. We might need to step on the gas in a moment, but okay. So I'll just give you a couple of minutes maybe to have a look at that and maybe shout out to each other what you think that means. Okay, just to save on time, should I go through them and reveal the answers? Okay, so DSL, what do you think that means? Do a shout out?
Nobody knows.
Nobody knows.
Designated safeguarding lead.
That's right. Yeah. So if you were to look at that document, working together to safeguard children, what it says is that organisations that work with children and young people, that they need to have some sort of structure, and they need to have somebody within that organisation who's in a position to be able to respond to concerns that workers might have. So if you're a worker working with somebody, or you're going in supporting a family, you need to know that if you've got concerns about a child, that there's somebody in your organisation who you can have a discussion with around what those concerns are. And you can go and talk to that person, and it's their job to decide whether you're going to sort of carry on offering that level of help and support, or whether you think you're going to need to speak to children's social care, because they are the people, children's social care, who make decisions about the levels of intervention, if you like. So each organisation should have one, and everyone should know who they are and how to contact them. And don't worry about, if you're worried about information sharing, oh, is it okay to sort of speak to this designated safeguarding lead? At the level you're working at, because you've got permission from the families to be able to work with them, they sign a consent thing, which basically allows everybody within your organisation to talk to each other, because it would be crazy, wouldn't it, if if you weren't allowed to talk to each other, because actually the parents are giving you permission to do that anyway. So don't worry about information sharing. You won't get into trouble. It's okay to speak to other people, as long as obviously you can't go down the pub and talk about it, or when we used to be able to go down the pub, you can't talk to other people about it, but you are allowed to talk to your designated safeguarding lead. You won't get into trouble for sharing information around that area. Kate, that's what I used to do. So it's a police term, and it's a child abuse investigation team, and it's those officers who are specially trained. They're all detective officers, and they all go on different courses for interviewing children and other things, and they work with, they're well used to working with other organisations, and they are those specialist teams within Wiltshire Police. Toxic trio. This is something which was sort of phrased about 10 years ago. People, there is a process of something called serious case review. So if things don't go so well, where if children end up being seriously harmed or killed, there is a process which the government introduced where they look at what happened, and they're called serious case reviews. And every few years or so, people do lots of research around those reviews and say, I wonder if there's anything in that research which can tell us about any of the risk factors that children were facing before they came to this harm which happened to them. One of the things which comes up time after time after time is domestic abuse, substance misuse, which includes alcohol alcohol as well, and also poor parental mental health. And what they found is in this research is that each one of these can have a significant impact on a child's well-being, development, and safety. And if you get all three together, the impact is even worse. And a very famous social worker called Eileen Munro came up with this phrase, toxic trio, because I think that just does really sum up what it is. It's a toxic environment where children are living, and it's either very damaging or it's a very risky environment. And we'll look at a bit more research a little bit later on to kind of show you some of the facts around that. CFVSF, Children and Families Voluntary Sector Forum, which is what I'm the chair of. And it's not just a plug, it's just to let you know that, that there are lots of agencies working on a voluntary basis, a bit like you, to try to provide extra help to children and families throughout Wiltshire. And last but not least, MARAC. This is a police and social care process, multi-agency risk assessment conference. What police do every 2 weeks, they research and look at the really high risk domestic abuse cases that they've got. And sadly, when they look at these cases, although it's primarily sort of focused at adults, what they're finding is that it's about 88% of domestic abuse incidents, there's either a child present when that incident happens, or there's a child in that family which at some stage they know are going to experience some of that horrible behaviour which is associated with domestic abuse. So although it's aimed at adults, the risk is about the adults. If they understand that there's a risk to children in that process, then they have to contact children's social care to let them know that children are being affected as well. So that's what they do. So any questions around that before I move on, folks? Does that help? And I think it's not just the jargon buster. For me, I think what that means is sometimes when you hear these phrases or abbreviations mentioned alongside a family's or a child's name that you're working with, it tells you that there's something different about this family. So if you hear that that child has been at child in need level in the past, you know that something in the past has affected the level of care, or they've had to get extra help. And if you know that they've been subject to a STRAT or a Section 47 investigation, you know that at some point something happened within that family which indicated there might be a risk of significant harm to the children living there. So it's just really to sort of let you know that they say it's not just a jargon buster. It means that these families, if they've got these things associated with their name, there's something different. and you need to be alert to some of the extra risks that might go with it. Does that help? So I'm not saying sort of prejudge people or anything like that, but you know, it does indicate that something is different about this family, and potentially there might be a risk. So what I'm saying is you need sort of like raised or heightened awareness around these families. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is just look at a couple of reference slides so that we can catch up. And this is just really to go through. And again, I say I'll send this version to you. You can sort of write down all the answers. So what we're doing now is to look at. So okay, one of the things that can help keep children safe is to know what risks they might be facing and what sorts of issues there are for them. They're one of the best places in the world to look for the current context of abuse and neglect around research is the NSPCC. And every year they publish reports called How Safe Are Our Children? In the 2018 report, I'm not going to go through all of these bullet points, but what they did find is the summary is that actually there's an increase in child sexual offences across the whole of the UK. And there's also been increases in child cruelty and neglect offences. So incidents of neglect have been increasing over the last couple of years or so, which has meant that children have gone on to child protection plans over the last decade or so. And also we need to understand the risk to children that they might be facing online, because what they said is almost a quarter of young people were actually contacted online by an adult we don't know. Now, we need to put it into context to the area that you work, because you work with the under fives. But there's also new research around, which tells us, if the slide will move on, that the increased risk to children just doesn't cover older children. So we're going to look at some slides now, which tells us about the use of the internet by young children. So I'll just leave that slide up there for a moment. And I guess, are you aware of this? That obviously if you technology can be a wonderful thing, but the overuse of it can affect children in lots of ways. So I'll just let you have a look at that slide and see whether there's anything you want to pick out of there. And it's something you might be that this is a surprise to you, or perhaps you already knew this anyway. So what do you think? So although we traditionally used to think about the risk to children by the internet, used to be just with older children, didn't we? But this study is telling us that actually children under the age of 3 spending 44 minutes a day using smartphones and tablets. And it's the first time that they recognize it can have an impact on a child's language skills, and it's seriously affecting them. But are there other risks as well? Well, if we look at research from the Internet Watch Foundation, and they're a charity, but they're sort of sponsored by the government, and they've come up with this information, which tells us there's been a 50% increase in the reports of child sexual abuse material from members of the public during the lockdown. And what they're finding is that they're having to remove more and more images from the internet. And what they're also finding is that the age of these children is getting lower and lower. So the age of the children in the images is lower, and also the children who are accessing this type of material is getting lower as well. And it's getting worse because of lockdown. Sorry, I clicked too far there. Okay, so what the Internet Watch Foundation did as well, they monitor people who are looking on the internet, and there's certain trigger words which they've got these algorithms which they can identify what people are searching for. And as a result of working with the National Crime Agency, who are a bit like the FBI in this country, they think there's a minimum of 300,000 individuals in the UK who are posing a sexual threat to children either through physical contact, meeting them later on, or abuse and neglect online. Does that surprise you?
No.
No.
Yeah.
So what they did, they also contacted the police. There's a bloke called Simon Bailey, who's the chief constable, I think he's Norfolk, and they contacted him for like a comment on it. And they said, so do you think actually it's getting worse? Do you think there's, and sadly, the majority of people who look at these images are men. It's a sad fact. There are women as well. We mustn't ignore that. But sadly, it's mostly men. And he said, basically, I don't think there's any more men doing it. I think that they're just turning to different ways of kind of getting their kicks through, you know, their sexual kicks, and they can do it online now. So it's about accessibility rather than, you know, more people are actually doing it. And again, we mustn't underestimate the age of children, as I say, because I know you work with the under 5, but there was in December of 2020, the National Crime Agency dealt with a 36-year-old man who had dozens of social media accounts where he was contacting children and young people, and he was posing as a girl. And what they found was that he abused 51 boys. There were 96 offences, and the age of the children that he committed offences against were as low as 4. And what he was doing was getting them to take images of themselves or carry out certain acts on themselves. So this risk that we thought only was happening to older children, I guess what I'm trying to say to you is that it could happen to younger children as well. And what we know is, again, from information for the NSPCC, that parents are, because of the stresses of, you know, children being at home, are sitting their children down in front of tablets and letting tablets do the babysitting. So that's a kind of a worry. And what they found with this man, they found that he had over they estimate, they're still investigating, he had over 500 victims across the world, and he approached at least 5,000 children. So that's kind of a worry, isn't it? So what I'm saying to you is, you know, it's not sort of scaremongering, it's reality is that as COVID kind of encroaches on parents, if they are turning to technology to help sort of babysit kids and to give themselves a break, then perhaps we should be saying more to parents, you need to be really, really careful about what you're doing. Okay, so I say that's not scaremongering, that's factual. So does that surprise you that younger children are accessing the internet that much?
No.
And it's quite a worrying thing now. You can get potties with iPod stands on. That's how.
Oh, crikey.
I mean, that really says, but I think, you know, as people turn away from books and media, they quite innocently get their children to use iPads to access books, don't they? You know, with good intent, but unfortunately, if that is internet enabled, then there might be other risks as well. And if there's older children within the family that you're working with, you have to worry about how careful they are about what their siblings are seeing as well. So I say it's not scaremongering, it's just, you know, having to face the reality that that this is actually happening. Okay, so any questions so far, folks? So I think what we'll do, we'll have a short break in a moment, but before we do that, should we try the breakout rooms? We're going to do a little activity, because you are about to sort of go off into this world of volunteering with children and families. And what I'd like you to think about and discuss is, what do you think the challenges will be of working with those families that you're going to be working with under the restrictions of COVID? Because that's a real reality, isn't it? You know, it used to be the case that you were probably mentored and you went round and worked with somebody who was a mentor, going into families, picking up all the skills, watching the mentor and learning how to do it. You know, that's very much different now. And you would probably pick up things, you'd have a little debrief when you come out of the home and have a discussion, and the mentor would probably say to you, so what do you think? What did you spot? Because of the ways that you've had to adapt your ways of working, I just want you to think about whether that's going to be more difficult, and maybe some strategies that you can all sort of think of to try to overcome some of those challenges. So do you want to put them into breakout rooms then, Dawn, or shall I? How should we do it?
Right, I've got 2 breakout rooms. I've got you leading in one, and I've got Teng leading in another.
Perfect.
Okay.
So it's a bit like Star Trek now, isn't it? Where we just here in another room. Yeah.
So 10 minutes, is that going to be enough?
Well, just let me look at the time. I think maybe. Or can we? It sounds picky, but how about sort of like 7 or something like that? Because we just need to catch up a little bit on time, don't we?
Yeah, 7 minutes with a 30-second countdown when it's up.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Okay, here you go.